This happened when I was in the first year of elementary school. Thinking back on it now, I often wonder if it was a dream. I still remember that night very clearly, so a part of me doubts that it was just a nightmare. It was a very creepy experience. It was a July night, a real hot one. For a reason unknown to me, I suddenly woke up. I looked at the illuminated numbers on the alarm clock and saw that it was just after 3 a.m. Ever since I was little, I had an interest in ghost stories, and at every opportunity, I tried to watch anything mildly spooky on TV. But when it came down to it, to actually being confronted by something out of the ordinary, something kind of scary, I was a true scaredy cat. So when I woke up that night, I started to get a little spooked. I was immediately wondering why I woke up. I was suspicious and fear was knocking at the door of my mind, if that makes sense to anyone out there. Back in those days, our family slept in the same room as each other. My mum, dad, me and my sister used to sleep on roll-out beds. Hi, Jay here. Co-sleeping isn't that uncommon in Japan. Families often use 2 or 3 large futons spread across the floor in a tatami room to enable parents to sleep next to their babies or young children. Back to the story. Since I was awake, I looked around. I was curious to see if anyone else had woken up, but no one had. It's quite a lonely feeling as a child when you know that you're the only one awake at night, isn't it? I felt safe though, so I thought I'd try and get back to sleep. I shut my eyes in preparation for sleep, but after a few moments of them being shut, I heard something. I stiffened up, almost instantly, in fear, because I swear I heard a woman's voice say something like, "Help me." It was definitely coming from outside, but it scared the heck out of me. Our family home faced the national highway, but there were very few cars that passed at night. It sounded like the voice was coming from right outside, in that direction. Nowadays, a lot of apartments have been built in that area, and new neighborhoods have sprung up. Along with that, there are convenience stores, family restaurants, all sorts. So at night, there are a lot of people on the streets passing by, so street noise is perfectly normal. But back then, the nights were real quiet. There was hardly any street noise or people walking around in my area late at night. So you can imagine how freaky it was to hear someone say, "Help me," so late at night. It wasn't just a one-off. I heard that same woman's voice asking for help multiple times. She was saying it over and over again. I thought it sounded like she was in our garden. Something about her voice terrified me, but not as much as the proximity of that voice. You see, right outside the room we were all sleeping in was our garden. If I was to open the sliding door, all I would have to do was walk down the narrow and short hallway, and I would be at the door to the garden. So what I'm getting at is, the voice sounded very, very close. I was so frightened by the sound of this strange voice calling out for help, but not fully committing to it. It sounded somewhat disingenuous, and somehow lethargic. It just lacked the urgency of a true call for help, and I think I was able to understand that, even at that age. Still, that call for help troubled me. It was frightening beyond belief. What was out in our garden? I shut my eyes and put my hands to my ears, but for some reason, I could still hear calls for help, even with my fingers jammed in my ears. After a while, the voice kind of just disappeared. It faded away. I wondered if the owner of that voice had wandered off. I felt a great sense of relief, in all honesty. But there was a feeling of fear that hadn't left me, a sense of unease. I felt, I don't know, but perhaps it was like the calm before the storm. So I decided to try and wake my dad up. He was sleeping next to me, so I gave him a couple of nudges. He didn't rouse though. My father was a policeman, and because of his line of work, he would often be a shallow sleeper. He would sometimes be on call for emergencies, and he was used to waking up at the slightest of noises, but not that night. I tried my best to wake him, but he was sound asleep. I began to panic, so I decided to go to my mum, who was sleeping just the other side of him. I didn't have much choice. I needed someone because I was scared. As I got up to step over my dad to get to my mum, that's when it happened. I heard it very clearly, and it came from the same room we were in. I heard an unknown woman's voice say, "Help me." It was the same voice I had heard out in the garden, but now it sounded like she was in the same room. I started freaking out. I thought I saw a shadow in the dark, but a pile of clothes can look like a monster if you forget that they're there in the dark. I'm not sure of what I saw, but I'm absolutely sure of what I heard. I screamed the house down. I was utterly terrified. I think I actually lost consciousness after that. I'm not sure if anyone came to my aid or not because I woke up at 6 a.m., our usual time for our family to get up. At that time, because no one said a word about it that morning, I decided to blame it on a nightmare. I had trouble sleeping for a long time after that, but that woman who wanted help never came back. I wonder if it was a dream? I'm not convinced though. I feel as if some kind of wandering spirit came to me that night because I was awake. Whatever it was, I'll never forget it. That memory has haunted me for years.
My family recently moved to a new home. I literally mean a new build. Apparently there used to be rice fields where our new home stands, but as it seems in most cases, nothing stands in the way of progress. A lot of the countryside in my hometown was being torn up to create new housing at the time when we bought the house. Soon after, one residential area is created, another follows, and then another. Before long, a town is developed, and I'm not sure if that's exactly how it went, but that's how it felt at the time. There was just more and more houses and more people. The countryside I grew up in was vanishing. On the plus side, my sister and I had to share a bedroom before we moved into that house, so we were very happy to each receive our own. I remember we were both chatting to each other about how we wanted our bedrooms to look. We wanted to get the layout right in our heads. It was very exciting. However, the first night I slept in my new bedroom was interesting to say the least. I had a hard time getting to sleep that night, I guess because I hadn't ever had my own bedroom before, and I had gotten used to not being alone. We had a family cat, and I think our cat was struggling a little with her new surroundings too. I probably shouldn't have left my bedroom door open that night, because the cat would come and go as she pleased. I thought that the cat was coming up the stairs at one point during my restless first night, but something about the wait and interval of the moments I heard coming from the stairs made me think that whatever was moving around there was bigger than my cat. Living with my family for so long in a small home allowed me to easily understand their movements, even when I couldn't see them, and something about the noises I heard late that night told me deep down in my gut that it wasn't a member of my family on the stairs. It seems crazy that I could be so sure of it at a young age, but I promise you that if you were in the same position as me, then you would feel the same. The movements weren't the same. The footsteps I heard had now reached the top of the stairs. I listened intently for any more movement, but there wasn't any. It was like it stopped in the landing just outside my bedroom's open door. My bed faced the door, which led out to the stairs. I couldn't take my eyes off the darkness beyond the door. I believed there was something out there that was in the dark, looking right at me. It was incredibly tense. I was scared to even move a muscle. Then, my attention was drawn down to the closet suddenly. I felt as if something was looking at me from there. I had left the double doors open. I could see the outline of the arms of my coats that hung up in there, but nothing more than that. Nothing more than the darkness that was all around my bedroom. I felt creeped out. Something strange was going on. I didn't know what to make of it. I hadn't ever had a night where I felt like this in our old home. It was like people were staring at me. You know that feeling when you just know you're being watched? It was like that. The only thing that was different was the fact that I couldn't see the watchers that were watching me. There was nothing but darkness. My brain told me where they were watching me from, but my eyes told me there was no one there. It was the eeriest thing I've ever experienced. Our new home was a new build. There was no chance that it could have been haunted, right? But that's how it felt. Then something else happened. I heard the sound of someone breathing heavily, but the breathing was coming from outside my open bedroom window. It was like a slow, drawn-out, labored breath. I could hear the inhale and the exhale perfectly, and was thinking, oh God, was there some kind of weirdo just outside? Some kind of pervert or something? Is that why I was feeling though I was being watched and something was off about that night? I was scared, but then the logic kicked in. I was on the second floor of our new home. There was no way there could be a person out there without a ladder. Nothing was making any sense. I then heard what sounded like a growling noise, similar to what a dog sounds like before it begins to bark. I was way too frightened to turn and look at the window to see what was out there. I stayed as still as possible and just prayed the noises would go away. I heard my cat, who must have wandered into my bedroom, was now doing that weird yowling noise cats do when they're stressed. I opened my eye and saw my cat off to the right, staring at the window, baring her teeth and beginning to hiss. I felt as if there was someone or something very nearby. I needed to do something, so I repeated again and again in my mind, "Go away." Before too long, that feeling of being watched and being not alone slowly dissipated. My cat eventually calmed down, and it felt like what was once in the room with me was now gone. It also was like something or someone came to observe and then disappeared. I woke up the following morning, and the first thing I did was look outside and try and make sense of the breathing and growling I heard. I caught my first glimpse of a nearby cemetery. It seems like one of the plots of land that hadn't been bulldozed for new houses was a plot of family graves, and I could see it clearly from my bedroom window. From then on, late at night, I would sometimes feel as if someone was walking up the stairs, or even as if someone was peering at me from the darkness of my closet. But I never heard those growling sounds again, although I did sometimes feel as if I saw a dark shadow resembling a dog from the corner of my eye from time to time. I tried not to think or worry about it too much, but it became a little much, and I ended up asking my sister to swap rooms with me. I felt a bit bad in asking, but she didn't have any complaints. Maybe whatever was coming and going at night was solely interested in me. She had a boyfriend, and he said he felt like something was off about her room. For now I'm fine in her room, but I give my old room a wide berth and wonder why something feels so attached to it. As far as I can tell, it's 2 or 3 presences. One that likes coming up the stairs and staring, one that hides in the darkness of the closet, and potentially a third, a dog perhaps, that kind of seems neutral since it only growled the one time. By the way, the cat doesn't even bother going into my own room anymore. Gotta trust the animals sometimes. They can see things we can't, in my opinion. My sister seems alright, and not too bothered by what I called the Watchers. I personally am quite afraid of them.
A long time ago, my family and I lived in a 5-story apartment complex. It wasn't the best, but it wasn't bad. We lived on the 3rd floor of the building. I think we all liked that apartment though. The rent wasn't too bad, and it was in a pretty nice neighborhood. We weren't planning on being there for very long because we were saving up to buy a house. I want to share with you an experience that happened in that apartment complex that really frightened a few residents, including myself. This takes place during the summer holidays. My son was in his 2nd year at junior high school at the time. That summer was incredibly hot. The worst thing about our building was the fact that air conditioners were not a standard. It was a very old building. So naturally, to beat the heat at night, we left our windows open. They were open all night. The sun went down, and at just around 10 p.m., I heard a sobbing sound coming from outside. It sounded to me like a child was crying. I was curious as to where the sound was coming from, so I stepped out onto our balcony to see if I could make out which direction the crying was coming from. It sounded like it was coming from a corner of the building, a few floors above us. At first I thought to myself, oh no, someone's locked their kid out on the balcony because he broke something or made a mess. You know, as a punishment or something. That kind of thing can happen, sadly. But then I thought, you know what, it's 10 at night. That's kind of late for a kid who sounded that young. It would be really cruel to do that too. The little boy's crying was becoming hoarse. He was now saying things like, "Mommy, please let me in." It was really troubling to hear that. He sounded so desperate. I think that it only lasted about 3 minutes in total. It was disturbing to hear just the silence resume and not a door opening and closing. I knew how heavy the balcony doors were in our building, so I feel as if I was listening out for it, I would have heard it. About 15 minutes later, I heard sirens blaring and a car pull up. I looked outside and noticed that a police car had parked outside of our building. I heard other residents open their balcony doors and look out. My wife joined me on the balcony and she said, "What if something happened up there?" I had work early in the morning, so I wanted to get to bed. I hung around for about an hour, longer, but nothing really happened. So from here on, I will have to tell you what my wife told me the following day. Apparently it was a family living on the 5th floor who called the police. They said that they heard the sounds of the little boy crying coming from the apartment next door to theirs. The wife of the household rushed to the balcony, and she said that she saw a little boy out there in just his underwear lying on the balcony floor. She instantly called the police. The child was crying and looking into the apartment next door and calling out for his mother. There was a problem with that though. One that the home owner recognized instantly. The child was calling out to an empty, dark room. The apartment next door was vacant, and it had been for some time. The police checked on the vacant room and found no sign of breaking or entering. There was also no sign of the child or the mother he was crying for. Everything was locked up. No one had been in there. Yet us residents had heard what we had heard. The housewife who reported the incident looked over the balcony again, after being told that there was no sign of life next door, only to discover that the child was gone. She swears that she saw him. the little crying boy has never been located. There were no families below that apartment who had little children. The family that reported the incident had children themselves, but they were both high school-aged girls, so it doesn't seem possible that one of them would make a toddler crying noise. This incident caused a bit of a fuss with the residents of our building. It even got raised at the next meeting of the Residents Association. Everyone was concerned for the child, but no one ever found him, which in turn started to create rumors. Locals seemed certain that our building was haunted, and this caused further issues with the residents, as all of a sudden we had a bunch of young adults running up and down the communal hallways and stairs, all excited about ghost hunting, screaming and hollering. They would come in the middle of the night, and it would be really annoying, especially in summer, as we all left our windows open. I understand their interest in the building, as a few of us residents all agreed that we heard a child sobbing, but I have really no idea what it was. I have thought about it being some kind of prank, but that doesn't really make all that much sense to me, as the prank didn't last long, and it wasn't particularly scary. It definitely wasn't funny. It was just kind of tragic. I personally believe that something might have happened in that apartment, in that old building. Perhaps an incredibly cruel parent did lock their child out there on the balcony to teach him a lesson, and perhaps it was too cold, or they left him for too long, or maybe he tried to climb and fell. I have really no idea. But I feel as if there's something more to this. I feel as if my building could have some residual energy. I'm glad I'm not living there anymore. Although it only happened once, I wonder if our new residents have heard the crying, or if anyone moved into that vacant apartment.
This all started about 3 years ago during autumn. A young woman moved into the apartment next to mine. She seemed pleasant enough when I welcomed her to the building. I think that those who know me would describe me as a slightly unusual person, and I have no issue with being labelled as such. You see, the reason I feel I would be described as that is that I have an ability. I feel as if I'm the type of person that spirits choose to reveal themselves to. In short, I can sense the presence of ghosts. I bet a few people hearing this now are likely sniggering, or even considering not listening more. But for those of you who are staying, please allow me to elaborate. I've had this ability my whole life. I can just sense when it's nearby. From the day that my new neighbour moved in, I knew there was a change in the atmosphere. I began to suffer sleep paralysis almost every night. As I lay in bed unable to move, I couldn't help but think that my neighbour must have brought some kind of present with her. It had been going on for a while over the course of a few months, and I had managed to get used to it. It sounds crazy to say it, but it's true. Not every night was bad. Then one fateful day came. I'll never forget that day. It was a Sunday morning and it was spring. Picture a bright, early spring weekend morning. That's when things changed. I had made plans to see my girlfriend later that day, but I woke up feeling so exhausted and kind of run down. I had been putting a lot of overtime at work, and I guess it just crept up on me. Plus, the intermittent bouts of sleep paralysis didn't help. I decided to ask her if she would be fine coming to my place to hang out instead of going out. I simply didn't have the energy for it. I told her I'd pick her up from the train station if she got herself to my area. I sent her a text explaining all of that, and then I rolled over to get a little more sleep. I was confident that when she called me, my phone would wake me up. At some point before noon, I heard my front door open, and someone came in quietly and slowly. I was thinking to myself, wow, what a considerate girlfriend I have for not trying to wake me up and getting here without asking for a ride. I figured I would just let her come and join me in the bedroom. I felt movement from the entry to the bedroom, and then it approached my bedside. But then I suddenly thought to myself, hang on, this isn't possible. I always place the chain on the door and double lock it when possible. The reason I do that is because as a child I suffered a home invasion. I always make sure that everything is locked at night, so it seemed impossible that my girlfriend could just breeze into my bedroom through a locked door, and she didn't have the key. As soon as the realization came to my sleepy mind, it was too late, and I felt as if someone was right next to my bed. And then suddenly I was frozen. Sleep paralysis was back in a big way. As soon as my brain recognized this impossibility, it was like I was suddenly locked in my body. I couldn't move. Whatever was at my bedside seemed to be binding me to the bed. I was so scared I couldn't even bring myself to open my eyes. I wasn't sure I could or not, but I didn't want to try. My fear was reaching its peak. It wasn't like other times that I'd experienced sleep paralysis, it was much worse. I felt as if the presence was incredibly strong. This spirit was seemingly more powerful than me, and I've never felt so hopeless in my life. Then, just as I was about to reach my limits, I didn't think my heart could beat any faster, but it could, because I heard 3 heavy, hard thumps coming from my bedside. Something was banging on the bedside table right next to where I was sleeping. I remember hearing that sound so clearly. It sounded so loud that it even echoed off the walls in my room. As soon as I heard that sound, the sleep paralysis ended and I woke up to silence in the room and a deep feeling of confusion. I felt somehow lonely, which was the strangest emotion I had to process. I got up and went about my day as normal, and that is something I have come to regret. A few days later, I found out from another neighbour that the young lady that moved in was taken to the hospital that spring Sunday night. Her parents hadn't heard from her that day, and they had made plans, so they came to check on her, only find that she had collapsed due to a heart failure. They rushed her to the hospital, but she didn't pull through. Because of the experience I had that Sunday spring morning, I believed that the spirit that came with my new neighbour to our apartment complex was some kind of guardian, and that the spirit came to my bedroom looking for help, and that's why I heard those loud bangs that woke me, and why I felt those strange feelings when I woke up. I don't know what the spirit wanted me to do. I couldn't put the pieces together, and now that the young woman isn't with us anymore, I'd like to conclude by saying I do feel some guilt, and I regularly pray for the soul of that young lady. I hope she is at peace.
This is the story of the house I used to live in when I was elementary school age. It was in Naruse, a small part of Machida City, Tokyo. I'm 32 now, and I still can't forget the events that unfolded in that house. We moved to that house because my dad got transferred with his work. We had to uproot from our little town and move to the big city. I'll never forget move-in day. I remember we were all in the car, and as we got closer to our new home, I felt something strange. I'm not too sure how to word it, but it kind of felt like we had turned onto a bad road. It was like as my dad turned off onto the sloping hill that led to our new home, something was different. Like an uneasy feeling suddenly arrived inside of me, like we were heading towards danger. I've asked myself if it was all my imagination a few times, and I know it wasn't. Let me try to explain. We approached our new home, and, like I say, it was at the top of a steep hill. Our home was one of 4 new builds there. As we drove up, I felt as if something was watching me from the depths of the second house from the right. I didn't know it at the time, but that was going to be our new home. The shutters on the windows were closed, and of course there should have been no one in there watching and waiting, but somehow I felt something's presence before we arrived. There were 2 houses I got a weird vibe from. The one that something was watching from, and another one which was closest to the railway tracks. I didn't want to live in either of them, but I was doomed to, because the one where I felt a presence eyes upon me was the one we moved into. It's kind of hard to describe how I felt when I first entered the house. All I remember thinking was that the air felt dark. I'm not sure if that makes an awful lot of sense, but what it means to me is that the atmosphere felt heavy and oppressive. I felt uncomfortable in there, like something about the house was trying to reject me. I told my parents how I felt, but my words fell on deaf ears, and we moved in. It didn't take long for my mum to find work in our new area, and that meant that when she did work, I would find myself more often than not alone at home. It was a tough time because Mum wanted to fit in at her new place, and she tried to make as many social nights out as she could manage. Also, she stayed on late now and then at work. Of course, I missed our old life and I resented this new dynamic, but what can you do when you're a little kid, huh? Whenever I was home alone, I tried to spend as much time as I could outside of my home. I just didn't like being in there alone. When school was finished, I would play outside until my parents came back. The first strange incident that I can recall about our life in that house happened on the first Sunday after we moved in. It was lunchtime and we were all sat down watching the TV together as a family while eating lunch. Something fell into our garden with a huge thud. We all spun around to look at what it was. I was shocked to see that it was my school bag. I couldn't believe it. I usually dropped my school bag on my desk the moment I went upstairs, and that desk is on the other side of the room from the window, so it just made no sense to me as how my bag could suddenly end up in our garden. I ran upstairs to my bedroom, which was the room which faced the garden. I don't know why I did that. I must have been a little more fearless back then. I checked where I left my bag, and the room of course, but no one was up there. My family had all been in the living room, with me downstairs when the bag hit the ground, so I knew that there couldn't be anyone up there before I even got in there. Strangely enough, the windows were closed too in my bedroom. I cannot explain it. But that wasn't the only strange thing that happened in that house. There were lots more than that. One other night, I was sleeping soundly in my bed, and I woke up to hear heavy footsteps downstairs on the hardwood floor. I listened closely in my half-asleep state, and then I checked the time. I thought I might have been late for school or something, but it was the middle of the night. Who would be down there at like 3 a.m., I wondered. Then suddenly the footsteps seemed to be climbing the stairs. They were so loud they sounded like someone was rushing up the stairs. The footsteps stopped at my door for a second or two. I lay there in bed freaking out, and then they started up again. They went back downstairs, and finally, out of earshot. As I was young, I was too scared to open the door and go check it out. Little did I know that this wasn't going to be the last time that I would hear those footsteps. They came and went as they pleased, and that was usually at night time. I thought I was hearing things at one point because no one else in the house seemed to react to the footsteps. One night while it was happening, my bedroom door flew open and I screamed. Fortunately, it was only my dad out there, and he came into my room and he looked really concerned. He asked me, "Has someone been coming into your room?" I was all like, "No, what are you talking about?" My dad then said, "I thought I heard some footsteps on the roof. I was wondering if someone was trying to get in. Maybe they climbed a tree or something else and was looking for an open window." Well, that terrified me. I got out of bed and I went with my dad to the window. We tried our best to see if anyone was out there in the yard, but we couldn't see anyone. We did notice that our neighbour had his light on and he was looking outside as well. I think it was again about 3 a.m. when this happened. Our neighbour shouted out that he thought he saw someone on our roof. That really scared me. Why would someone want to go up there in the middle of the night? That neighbour of ours was the one who was living in the house that was closest to the railway tracks. That was one of the houses that creeped me out too. Maybe he was going through some stuff. I mean, he was up and ready at 3 a.m. Unfortunately, we had little other options than to go back to sleep that night. So that's what we did. When I got up in the morning, I found my dad outside searching the premises. I went outside to join him, and I noticed that there were lots of footprints out there. It had rained the night before, so the grass was fairly damp, and we could make out foot indentations all over the garden. The strangest thing about it all was the fact that these were bare footprints that we were seeing. We weren't looking at shoe prints. Someone was running around out there, barefoot. It just didn't make sense. We were all very shaken up, and every night my dad would pace around the house with a torch and double and even triple check the doors and windows were locked at night. Things quietened down for about 3 or 4 days, but then we heard a terrifying noise coming from outside one night. It sounded like someone was climbing up the drainage pipe. My dad was straight out there to go and check it with his flashlight. He shone it at the drainage pipe, and all he could see were muddy footprints and handprints on it. It was the first time in my life that I saw my parents scared. It was unnerving, because ever since I was a little boy, they were the ones who had protected me and told me not to worry or be scared, and there they were, terrified. This was the point where my parents called the police. Some might say it was a little late at that point, and I tend to agree. I think we could have called them a little sooner. The police didn't help too much though. They said that they would patrol the area a little more. This all happened during the first month that we lived there. Everyone was on edge after the police call. And it was around that 1 month period that I started to notice a change in my dad. It was like everything changed. He even looked somehow different. The facial expressions he would make looked so alien to me. It was like he was acting. That was nothing compared to how drastic the change in his behavior was. He started becoming abusive to my mother. I get the chills when I think back to how my father looked back then. It sounds crazy, but he looked like he was a completely different person. We moved out of that house, my mother and I, and eventually my father did too. Once he was away from that place, he reverted back to his usual self. It makes me wonder though, was something there? It seemed strange because the house was brand new, but it felt like something was wrong with it. Like it was an accident property or something. I really don't know, but I feel like that place gave off bad energy. When I got older, I decided to try and do a little digging. There were no accidents in that property because it was new, but there were some fatal events that happened on the slope that led up to the house, and some others in the surrounding area. It seems like the slope had been the site of a high number of accidents. There had been deaths out there. In the surrounding neighborhood, something terrible happened. Someone set themselves on fire. Also, due to the fact that we lived close to a railway track, there were a few cases where people took their own lives on the railway crossings. It just felt like it was the site of so much misery. In fact, I went back to see the house for the first time in 20 years last week. The town had changed into a well-developed area. It was almost unrecognizable. The fishing pond and the vacant lot that I frequented when I was young were gone. But the house we lived in at the top of the slope, it was still there. 2 of the 4 houses had been rebuilt, but the 2 that creeped me out, my neighbor's house near the train tracks and of course the house that we lived in, they were still standing. It was as if time stood still. The houses looked the same as they did 20 years ago. New houses had been built close by, but they remained like a gloomy reminder of our horrible short stay in that town. I'm glad we left. I truly am. Hi, Jay here. I liked this story because it reminded me of the concept of psychogeography. If you're unfamiliar with it, it's basically the study of how places make us feel and behave. It makes me wonder if there are places where terrible things have happened in the past that become beacons for more terrible things to happen. Hi everyone, I'd just like to say a big thank you to my guest. Please be sure to check out their channel and subscribe. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please drop me a like or a comment. And subscribe if you're new. It really helps me out. I'll see you soon.